Hello everyone. I am Sleep with Fear and I am here to help you sleep while I tell you scary stories. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel before you fall asleep. The cottage had been empty for years. That's what the agent told me when I signed the lease. Remote, quiet, buried in the woods 2 hours from the city. Just what I needed. After the divorce and the insomnia that came with it, I craved silence more than anything. Not just quiet, but true silence, the kind that's thick and unmoving, the way old forests and stone cottages tend to be. So when I first saw the place, sitting at the end of a narrow dirt path like a secret, I felt something in my chest loosen. "This is it," I whispered aloud, gripping the cold iron key. It was November. The trees were bare, wind rattling dry branches like old bones. The cottage was older than I expected, stonework grayed with moss, a chimney slouched slightly to one side, and small square windows that stared out at nothing. Ivy crept up the north wall, gnarled like veins. Inside, the air smelled of age, dust, old wood, a faint hint of damp earth. But there was warmth too, in the old fireplace and the creaky floorboards, and the way the light slanted in through cracked glass. The kind of warmth that made you believe maybe a place could forgive the things you brought into it. I moved in that same day. Only a few boxes. Books. A French press. A stack of old sweaters. Enough to make it livable. I set my bed in the small bedroom near the back, where Ivy tapped against the glass like soft fingers. That first night, I slept better than I had in months. But the second night, just after midnight, I woke up. The cottage was still. No wind. No animals. Just the faint hiss of settling wood. And then I heard it. Tap. 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 Slow, measured. Not a knock, exactly. More like a gentle drumming. From beneath me. I held my breath. Nothing. I shook my head and lay back down. Old homes make noise. That's what I told myself. But it didn't feel like the house breathing. It felt like something thinking. The following morning, I woke to a gray light bleeding through the curtains and a sense that something had been off. I sat up slowly, trying to piece together the unease. The tapping. Had I dreamed it? I padded across the cold floor to the kitchen, the soles of my feet brushing across knots in the old wood. There was no noise now. Just the hum of the electric kettle and the rustle of trees outside. I glanced at the floorboards near my bed on my way back, weathered oak, dry and cracked in places. Nothing unusual. I convinced myself it was stress. Sleep paralysis, maybe. A trick of a half-dreaming brain. I'd read about those things. Still, that tap-tap-tap had felt so deliberate. So aware. By mid-afternoon, I'd managed to put the thought aside. I lit the fireplace, brewed another cup of tea, and curled into the corner of the couch with a book. Time slipped past in comfortable silence. That night, the fire burned low and soft shadows danced against the walls. I wrapped myself in wool and let the heat lull me. At some point, I drifted off in the chair. A loud pop from the fireplace startled me awake. The logs had shifted, sending embers into a slow swirl. I blinked and checked the old wall clock. 12:17 a.m. I stood, stretched, and turned toward the bedroom. That's when I heard it again. Tap, tap, tap. Tap. Same rhythm. Not from the floor this time. From the far wall, the one behind the bookshelf. Soft, but insistent. Like knuckles gently brushing wood. I froze. Listened. Tap, tap, tap. 3 knocks, then a pause. I stared at the bookshelf. Thick volumes of poetry, field guides, and water-stained hardcovers sat untouched on the shelves. I hadn't even unpacked half of them. Another knock. A fourth one. Slower. Heavier. I stepped forward, heart thudding in my chest. My hand hovered near the spine of a book titled Woodland Spirits and Folklore. No idea where I'd even picked that one up. The sound stopped again the moment my fingers touched the shelf. Silence returned. I pulled the book out anyway. Dust swirled in the firelight, and the scent of dry pages rose to meet me. Behind the books, the wall was solid. Old. No gaps. No panels. Still. I leaned my ear close. And for a single moment, I thought I heard breathing. Slow. Faint. Like something asleep, dreaming just behind the plaster. I didn't sleep that night. Even after the tapping stopped and the fireplace hissed into silence, I remained curled on the couch with the blanket drawn up to my chin. I stared at the bookshelf, half expecting it to shift, or open. It never did. By morning, I convinced myself again that it was just the house adjusting. Old wood, strange acoustics, wind caught between the eaves. That's what I told myself while brushing my teeth and making toast I didn't finish. Still, something stayed with me. A presence. Not oppressive, not quite malevolent, just watching. Later, I explored the attic. I wasn't sure why. Maybe I needed to prove to myself that there was nothing here. The hatch was in the hallway ceiling, hidden behind a frayed rope. It gave way with a wheeze and a shower of dust. The attic was cramped. Low beams. Dry insulation. The air smelled of old paper and mildew. My flashlight caught cobwebs hanging in sheets and the occasional glint of a forgotten nail. There were boxes stacked in the corner, untouched for decades. I opened one. Inside were yellowed newspapers and black and white photographs, sepia-toned portraits of a family standing in front of the same cottage. A man with a waxed mustache. A woman in a bonnet. A child standing between them, her face smudged by time. On the back, scrawled in careful handwriting. Margaret, age 6, her favorite hiding place is under the floor. That gave me pause. I sifted further and found a brittle journal bound with string. Inside were fragments of a woman's handwriting. Rambling entries. Disjointed thoughts. Mentions of scratching in the night and her whispering through the walls. And one line that chilled me. She only taps when I try to forget her. I didn't take the journal down. I couldn't. I left everything as I found it, closed the hatch, and spent the rest of the day outside in the cold, walking among leafless trees. But that night, again at 12:17, I heard it. Tap. Tap. Closer now. Right beneath my bed. I stared at the ceiling, wide-eyed, paralyzed. Then, for the first time, it whispered my name. Daniel. It wasn't loud. It wasn't clear. But it said my name. I know it did. A breathless whisper, as if drawn through the cracks in the floor like air through a reed. I sat up in bed, every hair on my arm standing. The room was dark, the kind of complete blackness that presses against your eyes. Daniel. The voice came again, this time with a slight edge, closer, but still muffled, like someone calling from beneath a thick quilt. I pulled my phone from the nightstand and flicked on the flashlight. The beam cut through the dark, catching dust motes hanging in the air. I swung it toward the floorboards. Nothing. No gaps. No movement. But the sound had come from directly underneath me. I stood slowly, lowered myself to the ground, and pressed my ear to the floor. At first, silence. Then, scratch, scratch. Faint. Slow. Like a fingernail dragged across wood. I reeled back, heart hammering. I told myself to stop. I was letting my imagination spiral. I hadn't taken my sleep meds since I got here, trying to go natural. Maybe that was the mistake. Maybe this was withdrawal. Hallucinations. Something clinical and explainable. I forced myself to speak aloud. There's no one here. It's just an old house. My voice didn't sound convincing. I returned to bed and left the flashlight on, its glow trembling against the walls. I stayed awake until the sun bled through the curtains. The next morning, I drove to the nearest town, 20 minutes away, and bought a crowbar. Back at the cottage, I spent hours kneeling on the bedroom floor, trying to find the source of the sound. The boards were old, the nails rusted. It took effort, but finally, I pried up the one closest to where I'd heard the whisper. Beneath was hard-packed dirt. No crawl space. No wiring. Just earth. The soil was dark and cold. I poked at it with the crowbar, scraping down an inch or two. Nothing. Then something clicked against the metal tip. I paused, then dug carefully with my fingers. And pulled out something small. Round. A porcelain doll's head, its face cracked down the middle, eyes missing. The back was scorched, as if it had been through fire. There was something etched into the tiny scalp. My name. Daniel. I dropped the doll's head and scrambled backward so fast I slipped on the edge of the pulled-up floorboard. The cracked porcelain rolled once and came to rest, face down, its burnt side exposed like a second, hidden layer of skin. My name wasn't printed. It wasn't painted. It was carved, crudely, unevenly, like someone had used a nail or broken glass. I stared at it for a long time, not wanting to touch it again. When I finally did, the porcelain was ice cold. Too cold for something buried in dry soil. My mind started spinning through possibilities, coincidences, explanations, logic I could cling to. Maybe this wasn't meant for me. Maybe another Daniel had lived here. Maybe it was just an old toy. A twisted prank from years ago. But deep down, I didn't believe that. I placed the doll's head in an empty shoebox, duct-taped it shut, and set it in the shed behind the cottage. Out of sight, out of mind. At least, that's what I told myself. That night, I went to bed early. I was exhausted from digging and thinking and not sleeping the night before. I kept the crowbar next to my bed. I left the flashlight on again. Midnight came and went in silence. I held my breath at 12:17, half waiting, half dreading. But nothing came. No tapping. No whisper. Just wind in the trees and the soft creak of the cottage stretching. Relief settled in like warm water. Maybe I disturbed whatever it was, forced it out by acknowledging it. Maybe it was over. I drifted off. But sometime later, I woke with a jolt. Not from a sound. From a smell. Burnt ceramic. Singed dust. And something else, like wet earth, mold, and something sweet, like rotting flowers. It came from the hallway. I sat up slowly, flashlight in hand. The hallway beyond the bedroom door was pitch black, even though I always left a nightlight plugged in near the kitchen. My heart picked up. I stepped out into the hall, crowbar in my other hand. The nightlight had been unplugged. The cord lay curled on the floor like a dead worm. A few steps down, I noticed it. A thin trail of dirt, leading from the hall toward the living room. No. Not dirt. Fingerprints. Filthy, smeared, child-sized prints dragging across the walls at waist height. They ended at the bookshelf. And behind it. I heard breathing. Again. Only now, it was louder. The breathing behind the bookshelf wasn't rhythmic, wasn't calm. It was labored, wet, as if each inhale dragged through waterlogged lungs. I stood motionless in the hallway, clutching the crowbar, afraid to move closer, but more afraid to look away. The tiny prints on the wall were clearer now, illuminated by my shaking flashlight. They weren't just smears of dirt. Mixed into the grime was something darker. Brown-red. Dried. Streaks ran down the wall where fingers had dragged. I didn't want to look, but I was already moving, compelled. Each step toward the shelf felt heavier, like walking into a deepening fog. My hand touched the spine of that same book, Woodland Spirits and Folklore. Its pages felt warmer than they should have. My fingers trembled. The breathing stopped. Dead silence. I held my breath and slowly pulled the book outward. Nothing moved. Then I pressed my palm flat against the wall behind the shelf. The wood was warm. And then I felt it, just the faintest movement. A shift. A tremble. Like something brushing the opposite side of the wall. Something waiting. I yanked my hand back. A single knock came through. Knock. That was all. Not a tap. Not a pattern. Just one knock, low and hollow, like a knuckle striking a coffin lid. I didn't sleep. I sat in the corner of the room with the crowbar across my lap, watching the hallway, the shadows from the firelight crawling over the walls like ink. I waited for morning like it was salvation. As soon as the sky lightened, I dressed, grabbed the porcelain doll box from the shed, and drove it to the town dump. I didn't want it in the house. I didn't want it near the house. I threw the whole thing, box and all, into the deepest pit of the landfill, watched a bulldozer move a heap of debris over it, and left without looking back. For the first time since moving in, I left the cottage for the full day. I walked the town streets, visited the bookstore, sipped coffee until it was cold. Anything to avoid going back too soon. Still, I had to return eventually. The sun was setting by the time I reached the cottage. And when I stepped onto the porch, something was sitting on the front step. A box. Duct-taped shut. The exact same box I had buried hours earlier. It smelled faintly of burned porcelain. I froze. My breath caught in my throat as I stared at the box. Same scuffed cardboard. Same torn flap on the side. My tape, frantic, uneven, still wrapped around it like bandages on a wound. I hadn't imagined taking it to the landfill. I had watched the bulldozer bury it. I had stood in the cold wind, my hands shaking, heart pounding. That happened. So how could it be here? I backed up a step. Then another. The air around the porch was unnaturally still. No wind. No rustling trees. Even the birds had gone quiet. The silence pressed in like a held breath. I didn't want to touch it again. Didn't want to bring it inside. So I didn't. I left the box where it sat, walked around the cottage to the back door, and entered through the kitchen. The moment I stepped inside, I knew something was wrong. The smell was stronger. That same damp earth scent, mixed with scorched ceramic and something sickly sweet. It clung to the air like a fog. I covered my nose and stepped carefully through the house, lights off, flashlight held low. I checked every room. Nothing moved. But then I noticed something new. On the wall of the hallway, just above the baseboard, a child's handprint. Small. Filthy. Perfectly clear. As if pressed with deliberate care. And beside it, written in the same smeared filth. Why did you leave me? I wanted to scream. To run. But something in the stillness of the cottage held me in place. I stared at those words, my breath ragged, heart pounding so loud I couldn't hear anything else. Then I noticed the door to the basement. I hadn't touched it since I moved in. The listing hadn't even mentioned a basement. But there it was, at the end of the hall, a warped wooden door I had mistaken for a utility closet. It was open. Just a crack. A line of darkness too thick for daylight to penetrate spilled out like ink. And from that shadow, I heard breathing. Not the soft, wet kind from before. This was faster. Excited. Like something had been waiting. Watching. And now, it was awake. I stood in the hallway, rooted to the floor, staring at the narrow sliver of black spilling from the basement door. The breathing grew louder. Shallow, rapid. Like someone hyperventilating just out of sight. The kind of panicked breathing you hear from someone hiding, afraid to be found, or worse, eager to be. My fingers tightened around the flashlight until the plastic creaked. The beam wavered slightly in my hand, dancing over the cracked doorframe. I didn't want to go down there. Every part of me screamed to shut the door, to seal it, to run. But I couldn't, not without knowing. I stepped closer. Each creaking floorboard beneath my foot felt like it echoed through the whole house. My breath was shallow, chest tight. I reached the door and gently pushed it open. It didn't creak. It swung silently inward. A steep staircase descended into total darkness. No railing. Just stone steps worn smooth by time and damp air. The smell hit me full force, mildew, burned porcelain, and something else, something that made my stomach lurch. I shined my flashlight down. The beam revealed only part of the basement, stone walls, arched low, thick with spiderwebs. Shelves lined the far wall, old tools, boxes, something that might have been a wine rack. But what caught my eye wasn't any of that. It was the muddy trail leading down the steps. Small, bare footprints. Child-sized. Too many to count. Some went down. Some came up. I didn't descend. I couldn't. Not yet. I closed the door and dragged a heavy wooden chair in front of it, jamming it beneath the knob. My hands were trembling. Then I ran water, scrubbed the handprint from the hallway wall until the paint peeled, opened every window, and let the cold night air in until my fingers went numb. Anything to make the house feel clean again. By the time I finally collapsed on the couch, too afraid to return to my bed, it was nearly 3 a.m. The fire had long since died. And that's when I heard it again. Not tapping this time. Knocking. From the inside of the basement door. Once. Twice. Then. "Daniel," came the voice, clearer than ever before. A child's voice. Small. Sad. I'm still cold. I couldn't move. The voice had been unmistakable, young, female, but hollow, like it had traveled a long, long way to reach me. Like it had been buried under dirt and dust and decades and still clawed its way out to be heard. "I'm still cold," she had said. Not angry. Not threatening. Just lonely. I stayed frozen on the couch, eyes locked on the basement door at the end of the hallway, half expecting to see it tremble against the pressure of something below. But it didn't. The knocking stopped as suddenly as it had come, as if it had only meant to remind me it was still there. She was still there. The next morning, I called the real estate agent. "I need to ask you something," I said, trying to keep my voice even. She hesitated. "Everything okay out there? Who lived in this house before me?" A pause. "Records only go back so far." "Why?" "There's a basement," I said. "Was that in the listing?" She went quiet for a moment. "The inspector reported it sealed off. Years ago. Most people just covered it up." I clenched the phone tighter. "Do you know what happened here?" Another pause. A longer one. Then, quietly, not over the phone. Later that day, I went to the town records office. Small place, tucked behind a post office and smelling of yellow paper and tired memories. A clerk named Martha helped me pull what files she could. The house had been built in 1892. Over the next century, it had changed hands many times. A widow lived there in the 1940s. A schoolteacher in the 1960s. Then, in 1983, a family of 3, mother, father, daughter. No names listed. But in 1985, the record noted a sale by the county, not the owners. Eviction. Or something worse. In the margins, in pencil barely legible. Child never found. I drove back to the cottage with the file folder on the passenger seat. The phrase, "child never found," repeated in my head like a mantra. Over and over. A grim lullaby. A warning. The sun had already begun to dip, trees casting long shadows that reached toward the road like fingers. When I arrived, the box was gone from the porch. I didn't question it. I didn't want to know. Inside, everything was still. No smell. No tapping. No whispers. It was as if the house had gone dormant again. I spent the evening poring through what few documents I had. Most were property transfers and tax assessments, but tucked into the back of the folder was something strange, a Xerox newspaper clipping from October 1985. Local girl missing. Authorities say 6-year-old Margaret R. was last seen playing in the yard of the family's rural home. Parents report hearing strange noises from beneath the floorboards in the weeks leading up to her disappearance. My stomach dropped. Margaret. The same name I'd seen scribbled in the attic, behind the old photograph. The little girl who liked to hide under the floor. Except she never came out. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the kitchen, lights off, flashlight in hand, eyes locked on the hallway and the basement door at the end of it. 12:17 came. The exact minute. Like clockwork. And with it, the tapping. Soft at first. Then louder. Tap. Tap. It echoed from beneath the floor, right under the kitchen table this time. It traveled, along the wooden planks, up the legs of the table, into the soles of my feet. I didn't move. Then came the whisper. But not just my name this time. She locked me in. The voice was faint. Cracked. A pause. Then. "Will you let me out?" My breath caught in my throat. I wanted to say yes. But something in the way the voice asked, it wasn't just a plea. It was bait. I backed slowly from the table, crowbar in hand. The floor creaked once. Then stopped. Not a sound after that. As if the house was listening. The next morning, I opened the basement door again. The smell hit harder now, earth, rot, and that ceramic tang of scorched pottery. But I didn't hesitate. I descended the steps slowly, one at a time, flashlight beams slicing through the dark. The air grew colder the deeper I went. My breath steamed in front of me. At the bottom, the basement was smaller than I thought. Low ceiling. Shelves with rusted tools. A collapsed wine rack. In the far corner, beneath a frayed burlap sheet. Something moved. I approached. Pulled the sheet away. It was a door, short, maybe 4 feet high. The wood was old, gray with rot, the handle rusted. Across the center were deep scratch marks. Dozens of them. Hundreds. Small. Desperate. I reached for the handle. It turned easily, too easily, as if someone on the other side had been waiting for it. As I opened it, the flashlight flickered. Then everything went black. Total darkness. My flashlight sputtered once more in my hand. One last burst of light revealing a narrow crawlspace beyond the door, then it died completely. I was left with the sound of my own breath, and something else. Breathing. Faint. Just ahead of me. Fast, shallow. I wanted to retreat. Every instinct told me to slam the door shut and run back up the stairs. But my hand wouldn't move. Instead, I knelt and crawled inside. The space was tighter than I thought. barely high enough to lift my head. The air was thick with rot. The dirt beneath me was cold and damp, and something about it felt wrong, too soft, like it had been freshly disturbed. After maybe 10 feet, the space widened slightly, just enough for me to sit up. My fingers brushed something. Fabric. I pulled it toward me. It was a small dress. Tattered. Mold-stained. The collar still had a tiny red ribbon stitched into it. And then I saw them, faint outlines in the dirt, barely visible. Tiny bones. Curled in a fetal position. A child's. Margaret. Suddenly, a breeze swept past my cheek. Inside the crawlspace. Followed by a whisper so close it made my skin crawl. That's not me. I scrambled backward, banging my shoulder against the stone wall as I tried to crawl out of the passageway. The flashlight flickered once more in my hand, dim and red like dying embers. Just enough light to see what was in front of me. Another figure. Crouched. Still. Only inches from my face. A little girl. Hair matted, face gray and eyeless, her mouth stretched far too wide, jaw slack, teeth like chipped porcelain. The flesh on her arms sloughed off in patches, revealing blackened bone beneath. She didn't move. Then, slowly, she raised a hand and pointed behind me. I turned, crawling blindly backward until I burst from the crawlspace and landed hard in the main basement. I slammed the tiny door shut and backed away, breath ragged, heart in my throat. But in the darkness, I heard it again. From the crawlspace. She's still in the walls. I didn't return upstairs right away. I sat there, back against the far wall of the basement, crowbar in hand, flashlight completely dead. I couldn't bring myself to move. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, those hollow sockets, the smile far too wide for something meant to be human. Eventually, morning light filtered through the small, grimy window near the ceiling. I climbed the stairs, every muscle aching. I sealed the basement door with 3 long nails and a 2x4 from the shed. Then I sat in the living room for hours, shaking, trying to think. Margaret's body was in that crawlspace. But that thing, that wasn't her. And it had spoken to me. It knew her name. My name. It had mimicked a child's voice, lured me in, begged for help. But now, it wanted me to know something else. That Margaret wasn't the only one. That night, I returned to the attic. I had to know more. What I found sent ice through my chest. The journal I'd read before, there were more pages I hadn't seen. Pages stuck together by time, or something else. I peeled them apart. They told a different story. Of a woman driven mad by voices in the walls. Of rituals. Of blood drawn in the shape of sigils. And of something she called the Hollow Child. Here is the next portion of your horror story. The Hollow Child. That was what the woman wrote again and again in her shaky, slanted script. The name was circled, underlined, scratched into the margins like she had to remind herself it was real. She said it came from the soil. That it fed on grief, on abandonment, on guilt. That it imitated those who had been lost. Her daughter, Margaret, had vanished during the coldest winter in decades. Trapped beneath the floor, she wrote, her voice still echoing through the house. But the thing calling out to her, it wasn't Margaret. Not anymore. There were drawings too. Primitive symbols in red crayon or dried blood. A stick figure girl with black eyes and a broken neck. A house, always with something curled beneath it, sketched over and over. Sometimes with claws. Sometimes with teeth. On the final page. I tried to bury it. I tried to burn it. But it always comes back. As long as someone listens. As long as someone answers. That night, I didn't sleep again. I didn't even try. Instead, I boarded every vent, every gap in the floorboards, every crack in the walls I could find. I smeared the attic window with salt. Not because I believed it would help, but because I didn't know what else to do. Around midnight, I sat in the hallway, crowbar in hand, flashlight by my side, staring at the basement door. It hadn't moved. The house hadn't made a sound all day. Not a creak. Not a whisper. But I knew it was still there. Watching. Waiting. At 12:17 on the dot, I heard the tapping again. This time, from inside the walls, behind the hallway itself. A series of soft thuds, following the length of the corridor like footsteps behind plaster. Then came a voice I hadn't heard before. Deeper. Older. She let it in. I froze. Now you've heard it. A pause. Now it knows your shape. I backed away slowly. Then came a new sound. Crying. Not a child. An adult. A woman. I'm sorry, Daniel, it said in a voice not my own. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to leave you. It was my mother's voice. Not perfectly. Just enough. Just enough to hurt. She died 2 years ago. Cancer. I hadn't been there at the end. Couldn't make it in time. And now her voice wept from the walls, begging forgiveness. The hollow child had learned my pain. It was using it. I collapsed into the corner of the hallway, covering my ears, whispering to myself that it wasn't real. That it was just the house, just echoes and madness. But I knew the truth now. It was real. And it wanted me. The crying stopped abruptly. The silence after was worse. Then came the soft scratching from under the floorboards. Not random. Not tapping. Letters. Being carved. I pressed my ear to the floor. A scratching sound. Then a pause. Another slow scrape. When I pried the nearest board up an hour later, my flashlight trembled over the dirt. Carved into the packed earth, one word. Stay. I walked back. There was no choice. My phone wouldn't work. GPS dead. Every road led back to the cottage. Like I'd been tied to it. Bound. By the time I reached the front door, the sun was setting again. My shoes were caked with mud. My coat was torn. I had walked in circles, hallucinated or haunted, I couldn't tell which. Inside, the house welcomed me with silence. But it wasn't empty. The walls felt closer now. Like they'd breathed in while I was gone and hadn't exhaled. I dropped my bag on the floor and stood there, heart pounding, eyes fixed on the hallway. The basement door stood wide open. And at the top of the stairs, footprints. Small. Bare. Muddy. Leading up. Not down. That night, I tried something different. I spoke to it. I sat in the center of the living room with every candle I could find lit around me. No lights. Just fire. I called out. Margaret, I said softly. If you're there. I'm sorry. Nothing. I tried again. If you're not Margaret, what are you? The wind outside howled once, sudden and sharp, like a scream in the distance. The flames flickered violently, dancing like they wanted to leap free. And then, from every wall, came tapping. All at once. A dozen different rhythms. A dozen different places. The sound surrounded me like a heartbeat. And then they all stopped. A final knock came from directly behind me. I turned slowly. On the wall above the fireplace, written in ash. You knew me before the bones. I stared at the message written in ash, my mind reeling. What did that mean? Before the bones. Before death? Before Margaret? A thought crept in, one I didn't want to admit. What if this thing wasn't just haunting the house? What if it had always been here? Older than the cottage. Older than the land. Buried deeper than I could ever dig. It didn't just wear the face of a girl. It wore any face. Any pain. Any grief. I sat down on the floor again, candles trembling around me. I didn't know you, I whispered. Silence. Then, from behind the wall. You forgot. Sleep came not as a choice but a collapse. I don't remember lying down. I remember only the soft, rhythmic sound of breathing in my ear, and a coldness that wrapped around my spine like fingers. I dreamed of the house, but not as it was. The walls were soft, pulsing. The floors throbbed beneath my feet. I was walking through a living thing, not wood and stone, but flesh and vein. I came to a door. Small. Familiar. The crawlspace. It opened by itself. Inside, not darkness, but fire. And above the flames, suspended by invisible threads, dozens of porcelain doll heads. All cracked. All watching. All with names carved into them. Not just mine. Dozens of names. Then I saw my mother's. Then, mine. Right in the center. And then a voice behind me, whispering into my dream. I keep what's left. I woke screaming. Every candle had been blown out. The air was cold. Bitter. The house was dead silent, and yet I felt it listening. I ran to the bathroom, splashed water on my face, stared into the cracked mirror. For a moment, I swear to God, I saw someone else staring back. Same eyes. Same shape. But the smile was wrong. Wide. Familiar. And then the mirror cracked without me touching it. I fell back against the sink, gasping. When I looked again, I was alone. But the message was still there. Scratched faintly into the condensation above the sink. You're almost ready. Ready for what? The house didn't answer. The air grew colder with each passing hour. The lights flickered, even when turned off. The floor creaked when I wasn't walking. The windows fogged over from inside. I tried to leave again. I walked the trail through the woods behind the cottage, hoping I could reach town on foot. No road this time. No paths. Just forest. The trees closed in quickly. And after a few minutes, I realized something impossible. I was walking in a loop. The trees repeated. The fallen log. The twisted branch. Even the bird's nest hanging from a crooked pine. I left a mark on a tree with my crowbar. 15 minutes later, I passed the same tree. My mark still fresh. I was trapped. Not just in the house. In something much larger. I returned to the attic that night. Something in me knew the answers were there. The drawings in the journal had become clearer since I last saw them, like time had faded the dust away. One sketch caught my attention, a spiral carved into the floor, surrounded by dolls with missing eyes. I searched the attic floor. At first, nothing. Then I noticed a faint groove in the boards. I wiped the dust away. A spiral. Crude, shallow, hidden beneath decades of grime. Exactly like the drawing. I knelt beside it, my hand trembling, and placed my palm in the center. Immediately, the boards beneath me grew warm. And then I heard the voice again. Not in the room. Inside me. Say it. I didn't want to speak. Didn't know what to say. But my mouth opened anyway. And something old spilled out. A word I didn't understand. Harsh and wet, like earth choking on roots. It tasted like rust. Like dirt. Like rot. The attic darkened. Not from the sun, but from the spiral itself. Its grooves filled with shadow, seeping upward like ink in water. The temperature dropped to freezing. And then the dolls in the attic, ones I hadn't touched, ones that had been long forgotten in boxes, moved. Their heads turned in unison. All toward me. Their empty sockets somehow aware. One of them opened its mouth. A child's voice rasped. "Now you remember." But I didn't. Not fully. Fragments surged through my mind, flashes I couldn't place. A house on fire. Screaming behind walls. A tiny hand reaching through wooden slats. A door I never should have opened. I stumbled back from the spiral. The attic was wrong now. Taller than it had been, the walls sloped inward like the ribs of a great beast. The dolls sat upright without support, and I realized they were watching me breathe. I ran. Back down the stairs. Through the living room. Toward the basement. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted to confront it. End it. But when I reached the basement steps, I stopped cold. The crawlspace door at the bottom was open again. Something was crawling out. I couldn't move. First a hand, small, gray, slick with soil. Then the top of a head. Long hair, matted with roots and cobwebs. Then the face. No eyes. No lips. Just skin, stretched and too pale, with that horrible, familiar smile. The hollow child. She was dragging herself toward the stairs, each motion slow, deliberate. Her limbs bent wrong. Her ribs pushed against paper-thin skin. And behind her, in the dark crawlspace, others began to stir. I slammed the basement door shut. Nailed it. Screamed until my throat bled. The tapping returned instantly, on the inside of the door. Faster. More urgent. 1,000 tiny knocks in desperate rhythm. Then they stopped. And the house whispered. "Let us finish what you started." I don't remember falling asleep. But I woke to find the spiral carved into the living room floor. Not drawn. Not painted. Etched into the wood. It had grown. Each curve wider, deeper. And in the center, something had been placed. The cracked porcelain doll head from before. The one with my name carved into it. I'd thrown it away. Buried it. Now it sat in the spiral, whole again, its painted eyes following me. I picked it up with shaking hands. Underneath, scratched into the floor. One must stay. I dropped it and ran to the front door. It wouldn't open. Not even with the crowbar. I screamed. Kicked. Slammed my shoulder into it. Nothing. From behind me, the voice came again. Not a whisper this time. A chorus. "We buried the key in you." I fell to my knees. What did it mean? My hands trembled. My chest ached. I pressed my palm against the floor, half expecting to feel something stir beneath it. Nothing. Just the cold thrum of a house that had become something else, something alive. Then, from behind me, a mirror shattered. I turned. The hallway mirror, untouched for days, now lay in fragments across the floor. But in those shards, I didn't see my reflection. I saw her. The hollow child. But, not as I'd seen her before. Now she looked like me. My eyes. My face. Twisted. Hollow. And smiling. As if she had finally figured out how to wear me. I backed away from the glass, blood rising in my throat. All this time, it had been learning me. Studying me. Whispering as my memories surfaced. Feeding on them. Shaping itself into me. A mockery. A replacement. And if it looked like me, then who would know if I was gone? I staggered into the kitchen, searching drawers for anything useful: salt, matches, old silver. My hands moved without thinking, grabbing, building. My brain whispered rituals from nowhere, fragments of symbols, as if something inside me had done this before. I poured salt around the spiral, lit a ring of candles, knelt in the center, and I spoke the word again. The one I didn't understand. The boards beneath me groaned. From every corner of the house, the voices screamed at once. Do not call her. But I did. Because I remembered now. Not everything, but enough. The ritual in the attic. The fire in the walls. A girl's voice crying in the crawlspace. It wasn't an accident. I was here before. As a child. I'd lived in this house. And I'd left someone behind. I chanted the word again, louder, throat raw. The flames turned blue. The spiral cracked open. And from beneath the floorboards, not through dirt but through memory, something rose. Not the hollow child. The real girl. Margaret. Still 6. Still broken. But herself. She stepped into the candlelight, eyes glassy, bones fragile. And she looked up at me. You closed the door. You closed the door. Her voice wasn't angry. Just tired. Tired in a way no child should ever sound. I dropped to my knees before her, the candlelight flickering between us. I didn't speak. What could I say? She stepped forward, slowly, barefoot, her feet not disturbing the salt circle. Her skin shimmered slightly, not rotting, not hollow. Just, unfinished. Like memory trying to rebuild her from fragments. I called and called, she said, gaze unfocused. You were right above me. Tears welled in my eyes. I didn't know. She tilted her head. You forgot. That's worse. The spiral beneath us pulsed. Deep within it, something stirred. Something that wasn't Margaret. She turned toward it and whispered. It's still here. It wants your shape now. The hollow child rose from the spiral. Not crawling. Not slinking. Floating. Her limbs dangled like broken branches, eyes blacker than the void beneath the house. But now, she looked more like me than ever. My mouth. My nose. My fear carved into her face like a cruel sculpture. Daniel, she crooned, her voice my voice. You left the door open. I only walked in. Margaret stepped back, clutching my hand. The hollow child descended onto the floor, bare feet touching the salt line. It hissed. Smoke curled from its skin where the salt sizzled. It couldn't cross. Not yet. But it smiled. You called her back. That was your mistake. Now the debt is due. Debt? I whispered. You were spared, it said, when she was not. It leaned close. You live. She stayed. The spiral pulsed again. The floorboards cracked, the house groaned like a beast in pain. From every wall, the dolls fell, clattering to the floor like teeth from a gaping mouth. I held Margaret close. What do I do? I asked, desperate. She looked up at me, eyes wide, shimmering like glass. You take my place. The words hit like ice. That's what it wants, she continued. Balance. Someone must stay. The hollow child grinned wider, stretching to the edges of her face. I already fit, she whispered. You've worn me long enough. And then the spiral opened, a hole yawning in the center of the house. Screaming wind. Cold so deep it burned. A pit that went down and down and down. The house was eating itself. And I had to choose. The spiral widened. Floorboards curled inward like petals folding to reveal a bloom of blackness. The wind howled, but there was no breeze, only pressure, sucking everything inward. The salt circle broke. Candles toppled. The hollow child hovered at the edge of the pit, arms open. "Come home," she whispered. Margaret gripped my sleeve. "You don't have to do it," she said. "You could run. Let her wear you. No one would know." I looked down at her, this girl made of memory, of dust and forgotten cries. "I'd know," I said. Then I stepped toward the spiral. The hollow child smiled. I felt the pull immediately. It wasn't gravity, it was guilt. A force born from something deeper. The house wasn't just wood and stone. It was a vessel, a prison carved from memory and sealed with grief. I stood at the edge and stared into the void. It pulsed like a heartbeat. The hollow child floated beside me, reaching for my hand. "Let me have your shape," she whispered. "Let me be seen." "I was never meant to live in your skin," I said. Then I reached into my coat and pulled out the last candle, still lit, flickering. I tossed it into the spiral. It didn't fall. It exploded into light. The house screamed. The spiral shuddered, its curves splitting like cracks in glass. Light poured from beneath the floorboards, through the walls, out the windows. Every inch of the cottage burned with memory. Margaret stood calm, bathed in gold. Her form sharpened, more real than before. The hollow child writhed, shrieking in my voice, face melting back into porcelain, then bone, then smoke. I reached for Margaret. She took my hand. And as the house trembled and collapsed inward, as the spiral devoured everything false and hollow, she smiled. "I remember now," she said. And then we let go. White. Everything became white. Not burning. Not painful. Just weightless. Like breath held in snow. Then came sound, soft at first. A heartbeat. My own. Steady. Familiar. Then others. A chorus of hearts, pulsing in sync. I opened my eyes. I was standing in the attic. But it was different. Clean. Untouched. Sunlight spilled through an open window. The dolls were gone. The dust was gone. The spiral had been scorched from the floor, leaving only a faint impression. Margaret stood beside me. She was whole now. No dirt. No bruises. Her eyes were clear. "I can go now," she said, smiling. I nodded, tears in my throat. "Will they remember you?" I asked. She looked toward the light. "They never really did." Then she stepped forward. And vanished. The days that followed were quiet. The house remained. But the air had changed. It didn't breathe the same way. The walls no longer whispered. The basement door stayed shut. I dug behind the house and buried what I found, Margaret's bones, carefully wrapped in the dress she'd left behind. I marked the grave with a stone. No names. She didn't want one. In town, I asked the clerk, Martha, if she'd ever heard about the little girl. She looked puzzled. "Margaret?" I nodded. "Can't say I have," she said. Her voice was flat. Empty. Like a page erased too many times. The night after I buried her, I dreamed. In the dream, the house was dark again. Cold. The spiral had returned. The dolls wept in the attic. And the hollow child stood at the edge of my bed. But she was still. Waiting. I asked her, "What do you want now?" She didn't move. She didn't speak. But then, I noticed her arms, thin, cracked. In one hand, she held something. A mirror. And in it, I saw myself. But not here. In a different house. Older. Standing over a crib. Whispering something in a language I don't remember learning. And the hollow child smiled. I woke gasping. The image in the mirror burned behind my eyes. A crib. A whisper. Words I didn't understand, but meant something. Felt true. The hollow child hadn't vanished with Margaret. It had simply hidden deeper. Not in the house. In me. I paced the room, heart racing, hands trembling. I looked at every reflection I could find, mirror, glass, the dark screen of the television. Always the same, my face. But something about it felt off. Just a fraction behind the glass. Like it was waiting to step forward. Like it knew a door had been opened again. And I had opened it. That day, I left the house. Walked for hours. Every town I passed looked familiar, but no one recognized me. Faces blurred in memory. Names forgotten. I checked my ID. Still me. I checked old photos. Still me. But the more I looked, the more wrong it all felt. I started seeing small things. Footprints behind me in clean sidewalks. Reflections smiling when I wasn't. Children staring too long and then crying. Something had come with me. Something small. Something patient. I returned home that night and found a note on the table. Written in my own handwriting. She's still inside. The final straw came 3 nights later. I woke to find dirt in my bed. Just a dusting. The kind you'd find under floorboards. Then the smell, burnt porcelain, faint, distant. I stood, heart pounding, and walked to the mirror. This time, my reflection didn't follow. It lagged, just a half second behind. Then it smiled. Wide. And whispered. One must always stay. I shattered the mirror. Glass rained down, glittering like ash in the lamplight. But the image remained. Not in the shards, in the walls. In the corners of my eyes. In the silence between breaths. The hollow child had learned me. And now it wore me so well that the world wouldn't know the difference. Even I couldn't always tell. Every night, I lay in bed listening. Not to the wind. Not to the trees. To the faint tapping that came from beneath the floor. And sometimes, from within my skull. A memory knocking. Trying to get out. I tried leaving again. Tried cities. Hotels. Back roads. Motels without mirrors. Nothing worked. The spiral followed. Not drawn this time, but in patterns. Carpet stains. Coffee rings. The way the ceiling cracked. It was always there. People around me seemed fine. But every so often, someone would glance at me too long. Their smile would falter. They'd step back. Cross themselves. Or whisper a name that wasn't mine. I stopped sleeping. I stopped eating. And still, she stayed. Quiet. Smiling. Waiting. One night, in the middle of nowhere, I pulled off the road and walked into the woods. No flashlight. No bag. Just the sound of leaves underfoot and my heart pounding like a drum. I reached a clearing. Silent. Still. I sat down. Drew a spiral in the dirt. And I said the word. The real one. The one that had haunted me since the attic. The earth pulsed once. And then, she appeared. Not the hollow child. Not Margaret. But me. Not broken. Not cursed. Just me. Staring back. And waiting to see if I would finally understand. She crouched across the spiral from me, this second self. Same eyes. Same scar on the brow. Same tired weight behind the smile. But she didn't speak. Didn't need to. Because I remembered everything now. The first time I saw the spiral, I was barely 6. I had drawn it without knowing what it meant. Something had whispered it in my dreams, long before I could write words. I had opened the door. Back then. As a child. And Margaret had gone through. She wasn't sacrificed. Not exactly. She was the first one the hollow child copied. A prototype. But it wasn't done. It never would be. Because that's the rule of the house. One must always stay. And now, there were 2 of me. One had to go. I rose. So did she. And we stood, 2 silhouettes on either side of the spiral. Not enemies. Not friends. Just 2 sides of the same wound. I stepped forward. So did she. We merged, not like mirrors or shadows, but like voices in harmony. Like secrets whispered too long to remain hidden. The spiral closed. The wind died. And the hollow child fell silent. I don't live in the cottage anymore. I couldn't. But I returned sometimes. To check the boards. To listen for tapping. There hasn't been any. Not since that night. Still, sometimes I catch my reflection lingering too long in the glass. Sometimes I dream in spirals. Sometimes I wake with dirt beneath my nails. But I'm not afraid anymore. Because I know the truth. It only needs one. And I stayed.